All right. So you haven't gotten any prettier since the last time I saw you.
No, that's probably going to be the story of everything. But when I get these kind of things, I notice that the beard gets crooked. So there, now it's all even. Maybe that
Uh,
helps.
I try not to look at mine because I know my mustache is all jacked up, my beard's kind of uneven, and I just don't even pay attention to it. So
Yeah, man.
yeah. So how are things, Jay Young?
Things are going really great. There's I don't know, just a lot of stuff going on. That yesterday's YouTube video was our first sponsored video, and so I worked with Lance Gungerson and Regen Ag Lab sponsored that, so I was really excited about that.
Very
Um,
cool.
and we're getting done drilling wheat. Should be cutting corn here in a few weeks, and got the calves weaned, got the cows preg checked, and yeah, life's good right now.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. So you're Jay Young. Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about tell us about where you're at and what you do.
So we're in western Kansas. We farm right at 8,000 acres. A little more than half that is ground we own, and the other half is rented farm ground. And so we have about was right at 1,000 acres, but we just lost 2 quarters of irrigated ground that got sold. So we got that leaves us down to, let's see, 7 irrigated circles that we have, and we only have enough water for to run 5 of those. So that's how much irrigated ground that we have. The rest is dry land, and we run um, 150 cows. And so on our farming operation, we do um, a rotation typically of wheat, corn, fallow. That's what it's been historically, but as we've gotten into regenerative agriculture, we've done more of uh, cover crop, like a summer cover crop mix, followed by fall cash crop. That seems to be the system that works the best as far as regenerative agriculture goes. Had a lot of challenges finding the cover crop system that'll work in between our fallow periods. And right now, I don't know, just the more I've looked at it and thought about it, I think the best way to get regenerative agriculture growing, at least in our environment, is to do a cash crop. Well, if you can't graze it, is to do a cash crop and interseed cover crops in that cash crop, and then do that continually, because then you get the diversity that you need. Um, and then you can get the cattle rotated in over the winter if you can, and if not, then somebody's the neighbor's close and they can graze it, great. But if not, like I really think that's the best way to do it. Wheat out here in our area, it's really hard to set the wheat up unless you have
What
a
do you mean set it up?
so like going wheat right behind corn, like harvest the corn and planting wheat just will work 1 out of 15 years. So
Is that
like
a nutrient or moisture thing?
moisture. So like the corn, like if we get a good decent rain in the fall, it's got to be the perfect condition where you're harvesting the corn crop, and then you get moisture event, or you get a moisture event, then you harvest the crop and then you plant it, and it's just rare. We're at 16 inches of annual precipitation. In the last 3 years, we've been under that. Um, and so uh, those are kind of the challenges that come when it comes to regenerative agriculture. So one thing that I did this year to try to keep wheat in the system was we planted a summer cover crop mix, and we rolled it with a crop roller, and
Okay.
then that didn't kill all of it, so we rolled it with a crop roller,
Okay.
and then we
Like hold up.
good,
Like
good,
I feel like you're just taking the whole audience and throwing them in the deep end of the pool.
sure.
Okay. So you said regenerative agriculture literally 5 times in the last, I don't know, 4 minutes. So what
Okay.
is regenerative agriculture?
In my opinion, because I think it's something it's hard to nail down a definitive um, definition, since there's so many people have different views and different definitions of it. But to me, regenerative agriculture is attempting your best to apply the now 6 soil health principles that there are. So the 6 soil health principles would be living root in the ground as long as possible. For us, that's a lot less time than it is for other people. Um, Multi-species cover crops or diversity of species, so meaning you want to get um, diversity, as much diversity as possible. Or if you're somebody like Roy Foltzgraf, that looks like diversity of rotations. He has 2,000 acres, and he has, I think, 17 different cash crops. I think this year it's 12, but he's had a years where he's had 17 different cash crops.
Don't talk about Roy too much. I'm going to try to get him on the podcast.
Okay.
So
Well, we'll get that'll wet the whistle for the future. Roy's pretty amazing, and that'll be a great interview. But
he has
anyway,
good taste
so
in pants.
yeah, so so living species or living root in the ground as long as possible. Diversity of species, integrate livestock. So if you're in our operation, you rotate cattle in with cover crops. Um, let's see here, minimal disturbance, which means you're going to do as much no-till as possible. Know your context is the newest one, and right now on the spot, I can't think of the one that I'm currently missing. But anyway, following those soil health principles is is to me what regenerative agriculture is all about, and trying to do. I think too many farmers' focus is on how much money they're making. And when you have that short-sighted mentality that you're going paycheck to paycheck, or your focus is on how much money you're making to survive, you're not looking big picture. You recommended me the book Dirt, or no, Gail recommended that book. I started reading Collapse, and I was talking to Gail. I was like, "Man, this is a harder to get through than I anticipated." And he's like, "Well, read Dirt first, and then get to Collapse." I said, "All right." So I'm listening to Dirt and just going through the history of all of the civilizations that collapsed because of poor farming practices
Every
is
single one of them.
yeah, overwhelming and alarming. And so to see that, and then to look around and see that we're not much different, we haven't learned from history, and the famous saying that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, um, frightens me.
You are
So
here.
yeah,
That's where we are.
that's where we're at and now. And so to me, that's why regenerative agriculture is important, and that's why you want to get in those soil health principles. So like I guess throw that back at you. Like, is your views of soil health differ any from that?
No,
Or I mean,
I think you're spot on. And here's what I'd like to add to that. I think we're still kind of maybe searching or trying to nail down a universal definition of regenerative agriculture. And I think we're getting close. But I think the part that we're missing is that it's not a destination.
mm,
It's not an end. It's not an end state, right? It's the journey. We're always going to be trying to educate ourselves how to better live in tune with the land and apply the 6 principles of soil health and regenerate the land, back to a productive state where it's supporting rich biodiversity.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then when you're just scratching the surface of what the possibilities are, we the journey to me hasn't been all that long, and it hasn't really picked up steam as much as it possibly could. And like for us, all the things that we've been able to change in the last 6 years, to me, kind of blows me away about how quickly those things can happen.
Well, agricultural undertakings, let's say, whether we're talking about, growing a crop in a field, or growing cows, or growing pigs, it's not a quick process. I mean, it takes time to see a result. And, we can talk a little bit about carbon. Like, they're still trying to figure out how to measure carbon. And, there's an ebb and flow throughout the year of carbon in and out of the soil. So if we're taking, a carbon measurement in March and comparing that to a carbon measurement in September, they're going to be really different. But does that mean we're stored or lost carbon? No, we need to make sure that we're, getting an accurate sample and either understanding what that yearly cycle is, or we're consistently sampling, the same time every year.
Yeah. Well, I guess
And it's going to take, I think it's just going to take it's going to take a long time to build up the data. Like, I feel like the early adopters in the regenerative agriculture movement, like we're operating a lot on faith
Yeah.
that we have faith that this works. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we're seeing it with our own eyes. Maybe it's confirmation bias. Maybe we're in a stupid echo chamber and we're all, not as smart as we think we are. But I forgot what I was going to say after that. I'm not as smart as I think I am because I forget what I was going to say.
It's totally fine. Well, and I guess if I back up to what to our history, our conventional, I mean, our practices. Dad started getting into no-till in the early 2000s, and in 2016, I found out about cover crops, and so it was kind of a passing because my dad was starting to stop doing no-till because the input costs on fertilizers were so high. And so I find out about doing cover crops and I'm all in because I had the video I watched was Gabe Brown grazing cattle on cover crops. And so that's the first introduction I had to anything with cover crops. And 15 minutes into that video, I was in because my thought was that guy is raising cattle on cover crops. I could raise cattle on cover crops. And, in our Greeley County has the least amount of cows of any county in the state of Kansas. And that's the county I'm in because it's very, very flat. There's very few creeks and very few areas where people just kept grass in. And so there's not a lot of grass to buy, hardly any grass to rent. And so it wasn't something that was ever an option. But I always enjoyed the winter because we got to run stalkers. And I loved running stalkers on wheat. I loved buying stalkers. I loved selling stalkers. And so when I found out that you could run a cow calf operation on a cover crop, I was all in. And so I started, I did a full month's worth of research, reading and watching as many YouTube videos as possible. And I go to my dad and I said, hey, on the ground I rent from Granddad, which was, gosh, I think it was 8 quarters of ground. I said, I'm going to grow cover crops and I'm going to raise a cow calf operation on cover crops. And he
They
said,
think you're nuts.
oh yeah, 100%. And I mean, like looking back on it, for good reason. I'm the type of I'm such a passionate person. And he's a very logical thinker. And so he needs all the evidence, to before he jumps in and try something. I just need somebody telling me you can do this. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll just figure it out along the way. And so, that I started off by buying replacement heifers, and we ran those replacement heifers, and I had 15 pair of cows, and so that was the first years, the 15 pair that I bought, and then those replacement heifers, and
What
it
year
was
was that?
2016. We bought the replacement heifers, and I bought the 15 pairs, and that year in 2016 we got the averaged really good on those females. Some of them we bought for 600 and something, some of them we bought for 700 and something, and then the market really went up the following year when we sold bred heifers, and so we sold them for $1,800 for the bred heifers. And so at that point Dad was like, as much work as I put into this, like I want half, and which was totally fine. So I we he basically bought more cows, and we figured out what the value was at the time that he bought more cows, and so we just merged. Once he bought those cows, we merged it together and formed Young Red Angus LLC. So that was
Okay.
kind of the beginning.
Let's come back to that.
Yep, great.
Let's talk about Jay. So obviously you're from there, you grew up there.
Yep.
Did you go off to college?
Yeah, so I went to Garden City Community College. I went on a football scholarship. I got redshirted the first year.
What'd you
Uh,
play?
I I played cornerback at the beginning, then they moved me to strong safety. But that kind of is an interesting story in of itself because I got there and uh, I just realized I was way, way not athletic enough to play at that level. And so I worked my butt off. Like they would let the red shirts during practice, they didn't have to condition so they could leave. So every red shirt left during conditioning except for me. And I set the cones up and I worked on my footwork to be able to cover wide receivers every single day while they were conditioning. And so the spring rolls around, and we're in a meeting, and I'm in with the defensive backs, and we're going through watching the video of court covering wide receivers on the short route portion of the practice. And the coach was just getting madder and madder, and I couldn't really tell why he was getting mad. Finally, he threw the remote against the wall and broke it. And he turns and he goes, "Jay, I'm sorry." And then he just starts screaming at everybody else in the room. He says, "Why the blank does the worst athlete on our team cover a short route better than the rest of you?" And he was furious that they couldn't cover a short route. And so anyway, at the end of the year meetings, I sat down with him, and he gave me a 5 in effort, and it was ones and twos and everything else. And so he said, "There's a great chance that you won't make the team, even though you put out better effort than anybody else on our team." And so I left that meeting just ready to work harder and prove everybody wrong. But then I realized I wanted to go to this internship in Texas, so I decided to take their offer to coach the red shirts and weightlifting. So the following year, I coached red shirts and weightlifting, and then went to an internship in Texas where I met my wife. The internship was like a Christian internship that focused on leadership, and so
Okay.
you spent a year there going through classes on worldview, biblical foundations, and things like that, and then you work for the ministry uh, during the rest of the time that you were there. And so I would love that. Like I felt like I grew in my faith a lot, my knowledge of the Bible, and I met my wife. So I mean, you
Double
can't,
bonus.
yeah, double bonus. So I had a great year there. Went back for a second year, and then came back, moved back to the farm in 2007. My wife and I lived in Alexandria, Egypt for about 6 months, doing missions work in
What was
2007.
that like?
It was awesome. Um, we lived at, well, so Alexandria, Egypt has a population of Denver, Colorado.
And
Um,
okay, so that's close enough to Cairo, close enough to the pyramids, yeah?
yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
we did that for like a week. Took a little vacation, went down to the pyramids. But the cool thing about Alexandria is that it's on the Mediterranean coast, and if you picture it, it's like 4 miles wide, like top to bottom, and then lengthwise, it's 8 miles.
Right.
And so Denver's population is 30 by 30 mile wise, pretty much. So in like a fifth of the area, they have the same population as Denver, Colorado. And so it was like people on people packed, but the people were great. Like we would walk through our little area that had thousands of people in it, and everybody on the street would holler and wave and say hello. They were very kind and polite. But I
What
thought it was
year was this that you were in Egypt?
2007, so I think it was like a year and a half or 2 years before the Arab Spring and everything kind of got
Okay.
a little
That would have
bit.
been the last time I was in that part of the world would have been 2002, 2003.
Oh, got you. Okay.
And we didn't make very many port calls on Navy cruises after 9/11, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I do have an interesting story about that though. That we would I would go out and I would drink coffee. They were a very night culture. That men would wake up at noon, and they would go to bed at like midnight, or no, they would wake up at noon. They would quit work at midnight, and then they would go out party till like 5 in the morning. So in their version
Sounds
of
like Mediterranean.
yeah, their version of partying though is going to a coffee shop, smoking hookah, and playing towelette or backgammon or dominoes. And so we're coming back from one of like a night of drinking coffee and playing backgammon. We're coming back, and I see this boy that I see playing in the street all the time, but it's 5 o'clock in the morning. He's still playing in the street, and I'm like, why is Ali like out in the street? And they're like, because he's playing. Like it was so weird. And I was like, yeah, but where's his parents? And they're like, I don't. His mom's probably sleeping, and his dad is probably out, drinking coffee still. I'm like, why doesn't anybody care that a 5-year old is out in the streets? And they're like, they all started laughing, and they said, "Hey, duh, Chicago." And I knew enough Arabic to know that they were saying, "What is this Chicago?" And so I said, "Why are you asking me if this is Chicago?" And he goes, "Oh no, it's just a saying we have. It's like, what are we no better than dirty Americans that we would kidnap our kids in the streets or shoot somebody?" He's like, anytime there's a crime and stuff, people say, "Hey, duh, Chicago." And I was like, "You're kidding." He's like, "No, like this kid's fine." And then like a week later, I saw two guys that had robbed a convenience store. like getting out of the convenience store, and everybody converged on them and beat the hell out of those two guys. And like, and then my friend that was with me before, he goes, "This is why we say A does Chicago, because we don't have robberies, and if we do, this is what happens." I was like, okay.
Their culture is very intolerant of thievery or any sort of
Oh
crime.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think I think the punishment for thievery in the Quran is chopping off a thief's hand.
Yep, and that's still practices, I'm pretty sure, in Saudi Arabia. I don't know how they handle it in Egypt, but like that street justice was very, very alive in Alexandria, because like you never worried about, any kind of thing like people robbing you or anything like that.
Yeah, they're, I was really young at the time, 19 to 22, 23. Um, drank a lot back then. There was
Sure.
probably no time that I felt really unsafe anywhere overseas. And I've been to Chicago several times. And yeah, you take the wrong turn and go a block in the wrong direction, and white kid with cowboy boots is not in the right place. I can tell you that.
Well, and my wife and I talked about it. We would rather raise our. I mean, like if we had to pick a city, it would be we would feel safer raising our kid in Alexandria, Egypt than any major city in the United States. Like it would just you would just feel safer, because like even if you worried about someone who hated Americans and had that death to America mindset, the cultural aspect of like having living in a city block, everybody on that city block views you as one of their own. So even like us being there, like people would tell me all the time, like, you have nothing to worry about here because no one will hurt you, because you basically belong to us. You are ours. No one would mess with you because you're ours.
There's a sense of community. Like, I want to say tribalism, but that's probably
Yeah.
not the right word. And I said it anyway. So there it is.
Well, it's I mean, it's a lot like what you see in the movie Lone Survivor. That in that Hindu Kush, when they gave that Pashtun, I believe is the word, when they gave that protection to Marcus Luttrell, they were ready to fight for the death because of that concept of taking care of one of their own.
Yeah. When they give their word, they're pretty serious people.
Yeah.
So as a farm kid, what did you notice about their agriculture while you were there?
I unfortunately we pretty much stayed most of the time in the city. I know they did a lot of flood irrigating from the Nile, and just from the beginning of the book, Dirt, like he talks about how how their flood irrigating in the beginning was very, very beneficial to the region, but now the way they've changed it currently is terrible, and they're going to screw things up pretty bad. But I don't remember what the changes were. This is one book that, listening to it, I'm like, I'm going back, and I'm like, because I'm listening to it now, but I'm going back, I'm taking notes, I'm highlighting things, because it's definitely something I want to use in the future as a teaching tool to be able to speak to people on, as far as farming principles.
Yeah, I'll make sure I check that out, and I'll try to get a link for that book in the show notes.
Okay.
So, um, so after you came back from Egypt,
Came back from Egypt and started a family and farmed. And the only reason I enjoyed farming is because I love listening to books. So I like the fact that I'd sit on the tractor and listen to books all day. I liked, raising, being around cattle and stuff, but I didn't find, I was not passionate about farming like I am now. It was just a job.
okay,
Now it's a passion, and I think the regenerative aspect of that is what is driven my passion.
okay. So, how did you stumble on regenerative agriculture, as we're calling it, and start applying those principles?
So I was at a buddy's house, and I don't even know that that was the buzzword. Um,
I
you
think
know,
most people were still saying it's sustainable till about 2017, 18, 19. Probably
Gotcha.
2019, most people are still saying sustainable.
Yeah. So I was at we got invited to a friend's house to play cards and play games and stuff. And so we had eaten dinner, and we're sitting down, or maybe it was right during dinner, and the daughter had it was in a class, and she was talking about what she was learning about cover crops. And I said, "Ooh, what's a cover crop?" And the dad, my friend Cameron, was like, "Jay Young, how do you not know what a cover crop is?" I was like, "Because I don't know what a cover crop is." And after he had said that, I'd realized I'd heard one other neighbor that had grown, and then they're not a neighbor; they lived in a different county, but they had talked about growing, turnips and radishes with beardless triticale to graze cattle on. So that was my only experience with cover crops. And so I went, instead of playing cards, he takes me into his den and he's like, "All right, we're going to watch this video." And he starts playing it. And I'm like, I'm thinking this is a 5 minute video he's going to show me. And the thing's like an hour long. And I'm like, no, I came over here to have fun, not to watch a YouTube video. This is going to suck on farming, no less, which I don't, I mean, I don't want to go to somebody's house and watch about somebody else doing my job at somebody else's house. Like, this is dumb. And so, like I said, I'm 15 minutes in and I'm watching what he's doing grazing cattle, and I'm like, I can do this. Like this is doable. They only get 16 inches of rain. We only get 16 inches of rain. Um, by the way, their 16 inches of rain much different than my 16 inches of rain, guarantee. They do not have the pan evaporation that we have. That's something Roy's to ask Roy. Take notes on that. Ask Roy
Okay.
about pan evaporation, how much it pisses him off when people in South Dakota say, "Well, we get the same amount of rain as you."
I guess that, yeah, that's a fair point. You're going to lose a lot more, I would say, evotranspiration, moisture losses from the soil and the plants to the atmosphere when it's 110 in the blazing sun with 30-mile-an-hour south wind. Like, oh, we only get that, what, once or twice a summer in the plains? Seems like
Uh,
all week.
yeah, some weeks, multiple times a week. Yeah, and
Okay.
you had that major event, right? That from December 16th last year, when the wind event that was 100-mile winds across the state of Kansas.
I can't remember how high it was here. It was maybe in the like 60s to the 70s
Yeah, yeah.
here.
But you remember the day?
Yeah, yeah. Like I think it was November 14th. It was either 14, 15, or 16. It was the same day the fire they ended up calling the Four County fire up there. Burned like 250,000 acres in a couple of hours. That thing was just ripping through there.
Yeah.
Is that what you were thinking about?
Well, I think it's two. I think that's actually two different events. We later on in December, because I remember the Ford fire you're talking about that went up, right, and it burned through that. I can't remember the name of that, but a major seed stock Angus breeder lost almost all their cows. But yeah, no. So later on in December, there was a 100-mile an hour wind event that lasted from like 10 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sustainable winds of 100 for a large part of that.
I think I remember the day you're talking about, and I think we had something like 68, but most of the day it was down around 45, 40, 45.
Oh, yeah.
I I just go hide in the basement. Like
Yeah. Well,
the
you
wind
have,
the wind straight up blows me right back into the house at 25 mile an hour.
yeah.
Like it's and where the ranch is, we're kind of out on top of a ridge. And so if they say the wind is supposed to be 20, out there it's 25. If they say it's 30 to 35, it's probably 35, maybe close to 40. If it's supposed to be 106, it's 2 degrees hotter at the ranch than it is at the nearest forecast point, it seems like. So, but where I live, about 6 miles north, down on the river bottom, a 40-mile-an-hour wind is nowhere near as horrible down here as it is out on the ranch.
Yeah. Can you hear that in the background? Do I need to shut that door?
I don't hear anything in the background.
Okay,
Nothing's
perfect.
nothing's coming through. You're fine.
Somebody's calling me and it's picking up on my computer in the other room.
No, we can't hear it. You're fine. Do you need to go check it?
No, I sent him a text message saying I'm still on the Zoom meeting.
Okay. All right. So you got roped into, you thought you were going to play cards and you got roped into watching an hour-long YouTube video about farming.
Yeah. So, and that's when I had done that, started doing the research, and I came to Dad. And the funny thing about that is like I stayed pretty basic for those first like 16, 17, 18, 19. all 4 of those years was I'm going to focus on what I need to know about cover crops and raising cattle on cover crops, a little bit of rotational grazing. Um, but whenever I would hear people talk about the science um, behind it, hold on one second. This guy is it's dropping off. Mineral just texted me. I thought he did. Is there any way I could go talk to that guy real quick to make sure that they're okay? Because the guy that works for me doesn't know what the heck he's doing.
No problem. We can take a break. I'll pause right here and we'll be back.
All right, awesome. Thanks.
And we're back.
Yeah, so I had to the kid that works for me is unloading a semi trailer, and he thought it was coming on a flatbed, and he freaked out when it got in the came out in the semi, and didn't think he was going to be able to unload it. And so I had to go out and be like, "You're just going to drive the Bobcat up and unload it from the back. It's totally fine." So the kid that works for us, his name's Charles, and Charles just graduated high school and lived in a suburb of Chicago.
Oh
And
dear.
he told his parents they're like, what college do you want to go to, what do you want to do? And he's like, I want to work on a farm. And they're like, what? And he's like, I've thought about it for a long time. I love the outdoors. I hate school. I want to work on a farm. And so anyway, he we put it out on Indeed that we needed needed to hire, we're looking for a job. And we had a really bad experience right before him. Like, we hired a guy in June, and the guy in June, we offer him the job, and I was like, Dad, we made a mistake. And he's like, what? I said, we were so excited about hiring this guy, like we didn't even ask him for his references, and he didn't offer them. So we should have thought of that as a red flag. We did a terrible job. And he's like, oh, it'll be okay. So I tell Dad, I'm like, call his references anyway. Like, even though he gave them to us after we hired him, like, call him anyway. So he calls them, and the guy's story did not line up at all. And so I said, okay, he started moving into the house we have on this property that he was going to live in. I said, give the guy $200 for his troubles, for gas money, for coming out here and moving in. Fire him now, because he lied to us about his references. Like, he's not honest. Like, we can't have somebody that's not honest.
Right.
Dad's like, well, let's see. And I'm like, no, like, we did see. Like, this is the way it is. And so Dad's still thinking about it, and he has to go into that house to get something. So he goes in there, and in the sink is a makeshift meth bong. And so I was like, yeah, it's like it had plastic on it, and it had a liquid and like a Kool-Aid in the bottom, had a hole cut into it, and a straw going into it. And Dad texts me, because Dad's never done drugs. And so he texts me, he's like, is this a bong? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
I don't know, Dad. Never seen one of those before in my life.
Yeah, so I text the deputies that I get, or that I have a great relationship with them. I was like, dude, is this a bong? Like, can you test this? The residue on this? He's like, we could. He's like, I don't know that we want to waste the money on a test for that. He goes, but that's what I'm guessing it is. Where did you find it? And I was like, oh, I'll tell you later. So Dad calls the guy. He's like, yeah, I think we're gonna be good. We still gave him the money for gas mileage and stuff for going out there, but yeah. So in interviewing Charles, we talked to all of his references, and one of the guys that his reference, Charles has been in the Boy Scouts all the way up to the last year of high school, because he loves the outdoors, and like every month he was camping. He's from Illinois, and so all the states that surround Illinois, he went to different campsites and camped and everything. And I talked to his reference, who was the scoutmaster. The guy just went on and on about how great his character is. And so
That's a good sign generally.
oh yeah. So like, he got here, and that's the way it's been. He's a ridiculously hard worker. He doesn't know a lot of things that I would assume somebody would know, but that's the problem. You shouldn't assume a kid that grew up in the suburbs of Chicago would know some of these things. And so Dad's been teaching him how to drive the sprayer. And
Like, you can unload a semi with the pallet forks on a Bobcat from the back.
Yeah, yeah. So But like, dad taught him how to do the sprayer, and he picked up on how to drive the sprayer extremely well. And that's not, I mean, I hate driving the sprayer because I'm so scatterbrained that I know that like sometime I'm going to be adding something, I'm going to put them out of order, or, do something like that. So it's nice for me knowing that we have somebody that is going like at 18 is already catching, kept picking up on how to do it. So I'm excited about that aspect of it. And like the all the other stuff I talked about, the character and everything else. Great work ethic. So great kid. Glad we hired him. Much better than the guy right before him.
Sounds like it. Hadn't even been there 2 weeks and he's already cooking meth in the kitchen sink. It's
Yeah.
not a
Well,
great hire.
the funny thing is my wife just bought the coffee shop that she's been working at, and she needs help. And so I was like, you just need to hire someone. And we're with another couple, and my friend of this other couple, he goes, says the guy who just hired a meth head and fired him before he even started working for you. I was like, touche.
Yeah, maybe we should call those references.
Yeah, not rush into it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, seems legit. All right, what were we talking about before you had to go unload the truck? I don't even
I think
remember.
I think I was wrapping up on the Gabe Brown raising cattle on cover crops.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And you were I was trying to get you to tell me how you made a transition to regenerative agriculture.
yeah. So, oh yeah, that's right. Because the first 4 years, I was only focused on cover crops and grazing cattle on cover crops. Whenever I would hear like Dr. Christina Jones, for example, talk about root exudates and aggregates, I would be confused because I'm like thinking, what's an aggregate? She's already talking on about the function and going on with it. And like then I get lost in the whole presentation, and I'm like, well, screw, figuring out what an aggregate is or why it's important and everything. I'm never going to be able to figure out, why um I'm never going to be able to figure out that kind of stuff. So why spend any time, trying to figure it out. So I would stay away from the scientific presentations and only focus on the practical ones that apply to me. So one day I'm in listening to. I was at a conference and I went and I sat in on Dr. Christina Jones, and I felt like I was starting to understand it a little bit better. And then she says, if you don't eliminate synthetic Phos from your operation, you'll never get to where you want to go on your soil health journey, because you'll never be able to grow aggregates and produce aggregates like you need to.
Okay.
And
Why is that? Why is that critical? I mean, I
so
get a lot of this soil health and nutrients and aggregates, root exudates, but I've never heard that specific one before.
yeah, so I wrote that down because I was like, I've got to ask this question. And by the way, for you guys that are listening, if you're ever at a conference, be the person who asks questions, because those are
Yes.
the people that grow. Those are the people that learn. Chances are somebody else in the room has the same question have. They're just too afraid to ask it. And the other thing is 90% of those dudes in that room, you don't know who they are. So why do you care if they think you're an idiot for asking your question? So I've
Exactly.
I've never cared when I'm at a conference of how stupid my question is, because I want to know what the answer to my question, and I don't care what everybody else in that room thinks. So anyway, at the end of it, I wrote down that question. I asked her. I said, "So I want to make sure you understand you correctly. If I don't eliminate Phos, I won't be able to grow, or I won't be able to get where I want to grow because the roots won't produce aggregates." And she's like, "That's correct." I'm like, "Why?" And so she explained it pretty much this way: that when your roots are in the developing stages right at the beginning, somehow the seed is able to tell, and or the root, once it hits synthetic Phos, as soon as it hits that, it's aware that it needs that Phos or that nitrogen. So it quickly expenses all the energy it can take to produce that 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 uh, that growth that it needs. And so it'll use all of its energy in consuming and taking up that nitrogen or Phos. Okay, that's not what it should be doing. What it should be doing is putting out an exudate. And so an exudate is a fine root hair that comes off of your roots. And so those fine, tiny little hairs that are coming off your roots, um, those exudates are producing a glue or a glomulin, I guess is what they say, but it's full of sugars and carbon. And that sugar and that carbon, it feeds the bacteria and the fungus. And so they're also sending out some kind of a signal somehow. And so those signals actually attract these bacteria and fungus that don't have eyes, that
Right.
can't, they're attracted by these signals. They're emitted by the plant's exudate system. So if the plant senses the Phos, it won't put out those exudates. It immediately just takes up the Phos and the nitrogen and absorbs it and just starts growing. Well, it stunts the root growth to where the roots are not growing and growing at the level that they should be, because all their energy is going into that above ground growth now. And we have a really cool picture of that in from the presentation I did. And if they look up the YouTube video, 200 bushel corn with no nitrogen or Phos, I have a picture of that that shows above ground growth, the corn's like this, where it has synthetic nitrogen Phos. Below ground growth is like this. And then right next to it, you have corn that has no nitrogen, no Phos, that's half the size almost, but below ground growth is 2/3 greater than the below ground growth. So the roots are actually longer than the above ground growth on the stuff that has it out there. And so when she said that at that conference, I had a reality check, and I realized I've been a wimp and been using the excuses of I have dyslexia, I can't read fast, I'm not smart enough. I All the excuses that I've had from my past that have held me back in school and caused me to be a poor student in school, that allowed me to have this crutch of you have dyslexia, you're a slow reader, it's okay that your grades suck because you have to work harder than everybody else, just get C's. I use that as a crutch. And so I realized that I need to get out of that mindset of I can't, to it's going to be harder for me than anybody else, but I'm going to, because I can, because I have a work ethic that is going to beat everybody else type mentality. So I decided I was going to start forcing myself to watch videos, write down when I didn't know a word what they meant, pause the video, write it down, continue on with the video, go look up that word, and then go watch the video again.
Okay.
And kind of take that approach rather than it's overwhelming, I don't know what they're saying, and I can't figure it out. And so through that process, it helped me to understand the science a little bit better. And then at in the this so that was, I believe, 2019. And then 2020, I saw a video, or not video, David Johnson was at the CCTA conference, and David
What's the
Johnson,
CCTA conference?
thank you, appreciate that. So the CCTA is the Colorado Conservational Tillage Association, and they put on the High Plains No-Till Conference. And so,
I've been there before.
yes,
They've had me out there speaking more than once, I think.
yep, yep. And that's where we first met. And so anyway, the he gave a presentation. He was the keynote speaker, and he talked about he did two different talks. So his keynote, he talked about the results that they're seeing and the science behind why Johnson Sioux bioreactors work. And then his breakout presentation, he talked about what a Johnson Sioux bioreactor is. And so when he gave his presentation and showed how to build it, I thought two things, because in his presentation, he said, if you build this compost bioreactor that is a static, non-turning compost pile, if you build them, then you'll be able to, over time, reduce your input cost by 85% on nitrogen, and you'll be able to eliminate Phos.
Okay.
And so he said that, the words eliminate Phos, because I'm like, I have to get there because of Dr. Christina Jones. So when he said that, I thought two things. One, he's crazy. There's no way that you can reduce your inputs that greatly just by creating compost. And two, I'm all in, because even though it sounds crazy and I can't wrap my head around how that's even possible, that's the only way I think that we can get there, because I've been watching other people talk about, reducing Phos to nothing. And I've been trying to do different things to get there with just cover crops and our rotations. And I'm not seeing the same success on our operation like I'm seeing Gabe Brown and these other people talking at these conferences are having success. And so in my mind, I'm like, this gives me a lot of hope, even though I think it sounds crazy. So we built, like, it was less than 10 days after the conference, I had built my first Johnson Sioux bioreactor.
Okay,
And
what is a Johnson-Su bioreactor and what does
so
it do?
the Johnson-Su bioreactor is a static, non-turning compost pile. So all other methods of compost that I'm aware of, you mix, dry materials with green materials, manure, and you like if you think of Elaine Ingram's method, it is a method of putting a certain amount of brown, meaning like leaves or corn stalks, a certain amount of green, so like grass clippings or green leaves or green plant material, a certain amount of manure, and then I believe there's another aspect of it too. But anyway, you put that in a cage, like think of
I pee on my compost pile every once in a while. That seems to work.
yeah. Well, this is like it's enclosed with concrete rebar wire that you would do concrete with. So anyway, you set that up and then you test it and see when it gets to 160 degrees, and then you break it apart and move the piles. And this is a layman's terms. I've never done it. So
Seems
um,
labor intensive.
yeah, it is. So that's the difference between the two. So Lane Ingram's method has more nematodes and more protozoa level of microorganisms,
Okay.
but more bacteria, less fungus, and it's ready quicker, but more labor intensive up front. So that's Elaine Ingram's method. The Johnson Su method takes longer. It takes a full year, but it's more fungally dominant to where what we've seen is close to a 1-to-1 ratio. And out here we have extremely bacteria dominant soils, which allow pigweeds and kochia to grow. It's a great environment for those two weeds.
Hey, pigweeds
So
are great. They have a deep taproot that breaks up a compaction layer. They're 20 a lot percent protein.
yeah, and I did a YouTube video on how great the pigweed was because when I dug up like all summer long as I dug up root systems, the plant that had the most fungi connected to its root system was the pigweed. And so I found
Why
that.
what okay, why do you care about fungus?
Okay, well, that kind of goes with the Johnson Su. So I'll answer that question as soon as I kind of wrap up the Johnson Su deal. So the Johnson Su bioreactor, it takes a year for it to break down, but A, it never goes anaerobic, it never stinks, and B, even though it's labor intensive the first day that you make it, when you basically you take brown materials and put it inside the bioreactor. Let's back up. You asked what it is. I'll explain that a little bit better. The way we build ours is you take a chemical shuttle and you take the bladder out of the chemical shuttle,
So you
and then
just
you
have the
take,
frame.
yeah. So for the newest ones we're doing, you have to do 3 of them, and there's 5 sections to those chemical totes that as they cross like that. So there's 5 sections. So we cut that middle section out, and so you have, a 2-section parcel that on there, and then you stack those on top of each other. The reason I stack them, I line them with weed barrier mat, and then I stack them. The
Do you
reason I,
have videos on YouTube of
oh
how
yeah,
you build yours? Okay. So like since like nobody watches this one on YouTube, and probably because I don't really put them on YouTube.
I,
Um, like let's just like keep that simple. Your YouTube channel is Young Red Angus.
yep,
I'll make sure that I have a link for that in the show notes. So if you want to check out Jay's videos on how to actually build one of these Johnson Su bioreactors, check the show notes. I'll try to
yeah.
hook you up.
So yeah, you stack those on top of one another so that you can, once the compost breaks down, you can have easy access to it. But you line those with weed barrier mat on the outside, and then you put 5 PVC pipes evenly distributed through the middle. So 4 evenly distributed from the corners, 8 inches in, and then one in the very center. You fill it full of material. Make sure it's wet when you put it in, like 70% water by volume. And he kind of explains that you squeeze it, and a droplet of water will come out of your knuckles. That kind of gives you an idea of how wet it's supposed to be. You
Okay.
put those brown materials in. You can make it with ground up corn stalks or grass clippings. But anyway, you put that in there. You pull the pipes out after a day, and then you just water it. He says a gallon of water per day. In our area, at least, that's too much water. So we've got it backed off to where once they've broken down after 6 months, we just lightly water the top, and that keeps it moist enough to be a good product. If you overwater it, you can get anaerobic conditions in the bottom of it, and if you, like in the first year we did it, we didn't realize that, so we were creating anaerobic conditions by overwatering them. But anyway, the idea is it never goes anaerobic, so that produces fungally dominant compost. And then once you have this fungally dominant compost, you apply it to your farm ground, and here's where the fungus comes in. So when your plant is putting out those exudates on its root system, it's sending those signals to bacteria and mycorrhizal fungus, but also other funguses that would be immediately close to the root system, to bring the plant the micronutrients it needs to grow a healthy fruit, vegetable, or grain. And so right now in our systems, when we're applying 180 pounds of Phos, or I mean, sorry, 180 pounds of nitrogen and 40 pounds of Phos, that's what we do on our irrigated ground. We're putting out Phos and nitrogen and probably a little bit of potassium, and the plant takes those three up, but then it's deficient in boron, it's deficient in manganese, it's deficient in copper, it's deficient in iron, it's deficient in all the other micronutrients that the plant needs to have a healthy fruit, vegetable, or grain. So now we as the consumers, or your cattle, if they're out eating that residue, they're not getting the micronutrients that they need to have a healthy, functioning, growing body. That affects, if you listen to Nicole Masters, she talks about how that affects gut health, and it basically affects everything. So our gut health in America and across the world, where people are eating vegetables, fruit, and grain that are in traditional agriculture, we're not as healthy as what we were in the 1930s, because we're not eating vegetables, fruit, or grain that has the nutrient density that they need. That's why regenerative agriculture is so important, is because it brings it back. If you're in a dry, arid environment like we are in Western Kansas, that's why Johnson Sioux compost, Elaine Ingram, or any kind of compost that you can get your hands on that is going to bring back this process quicker is so important, because I can grow a cover crop out there to start to bring back this biology. But as soon as I go through a drought like we went through last year, where everything's dead, the
Yeah.
biology dies too. So the biology you brought back with the cover crops then dies, and it'll come back with with spores, that are in the ground. But the process is so much slower than what it is in areas where they get rain. So adding the biology through the compost is so, in my opinion, is going to be so important. And so many people in my area, I've talked to a lot of people in my area that have tried cover crops, and they're like, oh, it doesn't work because of this, or it doesn't work because of that. And I think
Yeah,
part of
you
that is,
don't need that kind of negativity in your life.
sure, I agree. What I'm saying is like they blame cover crops and stuff, when I think that had they done a little bit more research and tried, or utilized compost, I think that they would have probably stuck with it a little bit longer. And then there are those people that want to try it, want to fail, so that they can say it didn't work, and here's why.
Right, right. So I'm kind of curious as to how disruptive your fungal networks, or how disruptive your planting is to your fungal networks, but I don't know if we can ever really kind of peel into that.
You mean like planting with a disc drill?
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that's kind of on my mind, and so last week I went to as we record this, when it comes out, it'll be like 3-4 weeks ago. I went to the Gail Fuller's Fuller Field School.
Yeah.
This year it was called Healing the Farmer. And man, I gotta tell you, it was cool, because there was maybe 120 people there, and it was more women than men.
That's awesome.
First agricultural conference I've ever been to that was more women than men, and it was a really young crowd. It was okay. So where were we a couple weeks ago? Bottom line,
Yeah,
it was
like,
a lot of guys our age and older, not a whole lot of young people, right?
yep.
At Gales, there wasn't hardly, like, our demographic was a lot thinner than
Yeah, yeah.
we've come to expect at conferences. There is still some older folks that had a lot of wisdom to pass on. But it was the demographic definitely shifted younger and female this year for the Fuller Field School, which was really cool.
So on what was their demographic? Was it like what was their job? You know, most of them were they most of them women who farmed or women who are in rural America or cities that wanted to learn more about regenerative agriculture?
I'm just going to cop out and say yes because I really don't know. Can't judge a book by its cover,
Oh, 100%.
obviously. But just from the women that I knew that were there, and some of the other stories that I heard, I think it was pretty balanced. I think there was there were some women that were definitely doing it, various stages of their regenerative journey, and there were some young women that were from the city that wanted to get out and learn how to make their own food, grow their own food, and be in touch with nature. It,
Yeah,
it was really so. It rained the first day,
yeah,
so they did the whole morning schedule in town in a building, which is not ideal. But then for
sure.
the afternoon, went back out to the farm. The first speaker, um, the second day, walked out barefoot. Like, we're outside on the farm, barefoot in grass. Just yeah, not something you'd see not something you see every day at a farm conference.
Yeah, that's cool. On the fungus on the roots thing too, with the pigweeds, that's what I thought was really cool is seeing that. And I know that the fungus I'm seeing on a pigweed's roots, so you can't see mycorrhizal fungus. It's too small to see with the naked eye. So what I'm seeing is some type of saprophytic fungus, I believe. And then there's another fungus that is in our soils. I can't think of it. The saprophytic funguses break down dead plant material. But even those, when you think about a Johnson Sioux, there's no mycorrhizal fungus in a Johnson Sioux because a mycorrhizal fungus needs plant roots to survive. And so all of the fungus that is in those Johnson Sioux, and like our best one that we got tested had 305 species of fungus, 365 species of bacteria. So 300 species of saprophytic funguses, and those funguses that feed on dead plant material, between them and the bacteria, 83% of them make. Uh, let's see here. I always say this wrong. It makes organic nitrogen available to the plant. I've been saying in videos and trying to educate people saying it's inorganic nitrogen. I made a video that we dropped yesterday that I had to wait to drop it because Lance is like, great video, but you say inorganic nitrogen. It's actually organic nitrogen, and it needs to be broken down in a form that the plant can take up. And I was like, great, I got to reshoot half this video.
Uh, those terms are kind of a little bit confusing sometimes when it comes to chemistry and
Sure.
what's
Yeah.
the word I'm looking for? Um, Dang it, not natural. Um, anyway,
Yeah.
it'll come to me. Nitrogen
Cool.
myth on YouTube, Red Angus, young Red Angus on YouTube. It'll be in the
Yeah.
show notes.
Yeah. So anyway, I it's cool what like seeing that biology in your soil. And then the other thing too is like everybody hates pigweed. Like they can't stand it. It's so terrible. But I mean, it's like you said, when we understand what's going on in our soils and we realize, hey, either whether you believe in evolution, or God, or whatever, like it was put there and it's there and it's functioning to fix a problem. And it is fixing that problem and it is great at what it does. And so when we see it and we want to just kill it and hate it, we're not realizing that we created the environment for this thing to thrive. And so if we don't want an environment where this thing can thrive, then we have to change the environment. And while we're on that process of changing that environment, realize thing has a huge taproot. The thing has more like fungus connected to its roots than any other plant that I've been able to find in my system, and that's a jack ton of carbon that it's emitting through its root systems, and it's got a jack ton of carbon from the fibrous roots that are breaking down after it's dead. And so yes, it's terrible for so many reasons, but it's fantastic for as many reasons and more. And if we can figure out the context of what's taking place in our soil, and we can begin to change and add more fungus through these Johnson Sioux bioreactors, then we can create an environment where the pigweed is not as likely to thrive. and make it easier to kill it. So I think people have to realize that when they think, like, they have to start thinking completely differently than what they're currently thinking about.
I agree. If you want to make a small change something you're doing. If you want to make a big change how you're thinking.
Yes.
And so a little bit to kind of continue with the fungal discussion that we're having. While I was at Gale's, I met a guy from his name was Adam from Pacific Substrates, and we got to talking kind of at length about mushrooms
Oh,
and just
that's
fungi
so
in general.
cool. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I was going to ask you about that because Gail had talked about the mushrooms and mycelium and being able to eat them to help out with depression and clinical depression. Did you guys talk about that?
Uh, you're talking about psilocybin mushrooms, and that's not necessarily the direction that I was going to go.
Perfect. You fill me in. I'm excited.
That might be that's a future podcast. That's a whole ass other podcast coming, probably not for a while, but yeah, we'll get there someday. Um, but what Adam and I were talking about, one of the things was I kind of have this theory, like, with insects, 98% of the insects in the world are beneficial. You
Yeah,
know, a similar percentage of bacteria can have beneficial functions. There's just this very narrow window of organisms, whether it's fungal bacteria or insect, that are harmful.
yeah,
So here's what I'm getting at: in the quest to apply apply a management practice in a bottle, fungicide, with all the fungicide that's been sprayed in the world, and as little as we know about fungi, have we killed too much of the beneficial fungus in the world? And
that's a
is it just going to take time to get that back with, doing things like Johnson Su bioreactors and figuring out, what 300 or 400 species of fungi are going to grow on that thing and thrive in the farm field?
Are you aware of Toby Kears?
Educate me, sir.
So she. I don't know if you got a chance to watch the full one on the nitrogen myth, but so I mentioned her in the end of that video that I found her video the end of this summer. It was in July because I remember I put it on in the background while I was doing something else, and so her research is amazing. Through what they're doing, they've been able to find that plants know, or yeah, so fungus is able to tell which plants in an environment are feeding them more carbon. So those fungus will bring them they'll discriminate and they will go to the plants that are giving them more carbon, and they will bring and feed more micronutrients to those plants. And then it's up to those plants to decide when they have too much and give it to the other plants around them or whatever. But they're able to find through her research that fungus discriminates on what plants get what based on which plants are benefiting them.
It's
Um,
it's almost like the soil is its own living organism.
yes.
Crazy.
So she actually is going around the world and getting different samples of fungus to classify as many fungus as possible. And then her hope is that we can identify the ones that are going extinct and begin to make them protected species, that are protected like wildlife are protected. And it's funny because 10 years ago I would have thought that's crazy and stupid, and now just based on what you find out through history and how we've destroyed so many things when we're not put in check. um,
Milkweed.
yeah, so I think that there's so many fungus, kind of like you said about going extinct. Like, how many do we already kill from years and years of tillage that were in our soils that probably won't come back?
I don't think we'll ever know.
Yeah, and
But what I do know is I got to pay a bill real quick. So we're going to do a quick ad read.
that sounds great.
Introducing C90 Ocean Minerals. C90 offers complete nutrient support for today's farm and ranch. With over 90 minerals and trace elements in nature's perfect balance, C90 remineralizes soil, increases pasture quality, and elevates the wellness of your herd. Enjoy improved drought resistance, increased pasture protein and RFV values, and the elimination of pink eye and foot and hoof rot. Originally discovered by Dr. Maynard Murray, C90 is the only product that meets his standards for sea energy agriculture, including a living ocean source and elevated amounts of macro and trace elements. Freshly created in the Sea of Cortez and OMRI certified, C90 is free from pollutants and contaminants, including microplastics. Visit C90.com to learn more today. That's SEA-90.com. C90 is available through distributors across the U.S., including over 200 Tractor Supply locations. Click the link in the show notes to find the dealer nearest you. We're always looking to grow our network. Give us a call or email today, and be sure to mention that Ranching Reboot sent you. Please check the show notes for all the contact information. Now back to this week's episode.
That wasn't so bad, was it?
That was great.
So we were
That's-
talking about fungi.
Yeah, no, your commercial threw me off because like it made me think about just like the marketing and promoting the aspect of YouTube that like I don't necessarily care for that aspect of it, but once you tap into that, it allows you to do other things that you probably you wouldn't have had access to, and it's something that it's like the quality of videos. When we first started, it was just a single shot the entire time, me telling a story, and now it's you have so much B-roll, which is the you're talking and all
Oh
of a
yeah.
sudden footage and stuff. So it's like you have to I didn't want to learn about B-roll or cinematography or all that stuff, but I realized man, I if I'm going to tell the story and I'm going to tell it well and I'm going to get people's attention, I have to be better at these things I hate and I suck at. And so it's
Like clickbaity titles and
yeah, exactly. Or yeah, and thumbnails that like I would rather just YouTube pick the thumbnail. Now I'm taking 30 minutes to make a thumbnail that I think looks stupid, but it has my face on it, and YouTube tells me, thumbnails that have your big dumb face on it are more likely to get clicked on for whatever reason.
yep.
So anyway, it's like that one I posted yesterday. The click through rate is 15%. My channel average is 6%, and so it's like whatever I did with that thumbnail is actually working. And it's like those are things that I would have never thought of a year ago that now just like through looking through things. And it's like you with that with that advertisement, it's like I don't want to have to pursue people to talk to them about advertising on my YouTube channel. But at the same time, like if I have that attitude, I can have that attitude, or I can have, okay, who are the companies that I already work with that I love that I would like for other people to work with, like Regen Ag Labs. And so it's like it makes sense to reach out to Regen Ag Labs because they're a company I already believe in. And if I can help them and they can help me, like why am I not, looking out or looking to promote them?
Hey, we can't give away all the secrets. we can't give away all the secrets on the podcast until we have them all figured out and have them applied, right? But this sounds like a great discussion that you and I should have when the recording is not going.
Fair enough.
Because I figured out a few things too, and I'm definitely working on that, trying to do more self promotion, which I honestly suck at. I mean, look, if I was good at self promotion, I'd be good at I'd be a better marketer. And if I was a better marketer, I wouldn't be in the cattle business. I'd be, going out making a living selling something on commission and being, really good at it.
Yeah. So back to fungus.
Yes, back to fungus.
What was your question on fungus or the follow up?
Do you have any fruiting fungus that you see in your crop fields?
Oh man, I
By
wish.
fruiting fungus, we're talking about like, a toadstool or a mushroom cap or a little goomba or whatever, right?
Yeah. So we're drilling wheat at the beginning of September, which is rare for us because we typically try to plant wheat around the 15th of September. And anyway, so I got to find this conversation so I can hold this up so you can see it. But I found a mushroom that is the biggest mushroom I've ever seen. Let's see if I can hold up to the deal. See my hand in there?
Holy crap. That's 8 inches probably across.
Yeah. That was on our farm ground right where I was drilling wheat.
Yeah, so
And
he showed a picture of a mushroom cap that was probably it was probably 6 inches tall,
yeah,
and the mushroom cap was about 8 inches around. That's pretty serious mushroom.
yeah. So before Johnson Sioux and before regenerative agriculture, I rarely saw mushrooms on any of our ground. Now, every time it rains, mushrooms sprout up.
That's
And
wonderful.
and that's I think that's something that farmers need to be aware of. Like we need to be aware that fungus is critical to growing healthy crops. And I think so many times like farmers are just focused on yield and on having the best yield. And so when their focus is on let's have the best yield, they miss out on all these other aspects that are so important that we're not even focused on. Like, why are there so many more people that have celiac disease than there were 50 years ago? Why are there so many more people that have autoimmune disorders than there were 50 years ago? Why do we, like start beginning to ask the questions, why do we see these things? And when I think I was even in doing cover crop still, I really pushed back on people who were pro organic, and I really pushed back on people that would talk about the dangers of glyphosate and the dangers of different kind of chemicals because I didn't see any other way to farm without those things. And so like it was almost like they were challenging my way of life and telling me that my way of life was wrong and bad. And now, like as I've thought
That's
more about,
that's why it's so hard to
yeah,
have sometimes just a simple conversation with another producer,
yeah,
because just asking them a simple question, why do you spray so much glyphosate? It's, they can almost take that as an attack on their very identity. It's like you're attacking the core of their being by asking them why they use glyphosate. Like, no,
yeah,
dude, it's just a simple question. Like, trust me, I've gotten plenty of heat on social media for asking people, if you got to feed hay for 200 plus days a year, does it make sense to ranch where you're at? Like,
yeah,
I think that's a pretty reasonable question, honestly. Apparently, if you're somewhere where you feed hay for over 200 days a year and you have cows, that's an offensive question.
yeah. Well, and so I think like the thing is though is like whenever you are in the process of having your eyes opened, um, sometimes reflecting on those truths are offensive. You have to accept that glyphosate is bad for you, it's bad for your soil, and it's bad for your plants. Um, and so, is it a tool that we use occasionally to be able to stop weeds so that we can even grow plants? Yes, it is. But can we find a way to drastically reduce the amount of times that we spray it to where we're only making one glyphosate application a year instead of 5 or 6? Yes, we can. Um, can I imagine a world where I don't use glyphosate? No, but does that mean I can't ever get there? No, it doesn't. Like we can if we try things and we investigate and we study and we research and we try new things, I believe eventually we'll get to a place where we're not using any kind of pet or herbicides. I can't imagine that right now, but that doesn't mean that we'll get there. I didn't think it was possible to eliminate phosphorus 3 years ago, and
But you
now
did it anyway.
yeah, and now we're on this year. We'll want to apply any phosphorus, and I don't plan applying any phosphorus anytime soon because, according to the test that Regen Ag Labs did on our soil, most of our irrigated ground, and I'm guessing our dryland's not too far off, our irrigated ground has 1,200 pounds of phosphorus in it, and most of that's tied up with calcium. And so 1,200 pounds of phosphorus is the equivalency of 5,000 pounds of mez. We typically apply 40 pounds of Phos in the form of mez. So 40 pounds ends
I
up
have
being
no idea what you're talking about. Can you
okay.
explain that like I'm five, maybe?
Right, perfect. So the two main fertilizers that farmers use are nitrogen and phosphorus, and a form of phosphorus is mez. So it's a dry granular form of phosphorus that you can apply to your ground when you drill your wheat. You can put like if you
It
picture
goes
like
in the seed furrow.
Yeah, it goes in the seed furrow with your seed. So phosphorus, in the form of mez, like you typically apply 40 pounds of it in our area,
40
someplace
pounds per acre.
40 pounds per acre.
Okay.
So when we do that soil sample and it's showing us that we have 1,200 pounds of phosphorus, to get 1,200 pounds of phosphorus, you need to
That's
apply 5,000 pounds of mez. So to apply 5,000 pounds like if we have 5,000 pounds of mez sitting in our soil, the equivalency of it, it means that we have 130 years of phosphorus stockpiled in our soils from over applying phosphorus for years. The reason we have that much phosphorus stockpiled is because we've had years of applying mez at 40 pounds. When you apply it at 40 pounds, when it goes into the soil, immediately, like it has a negative charge to it. So
okay.
the negative charge means that it wants to bind with positively charged, what do you call those?
Ions,
Yeah,
particles.
so it has that negative charge. Well, it wants to bind with things that have a positive charge. Well, calcium has a positive charge. So when you put out that synthetic phos, the calcium that you do have in your soils binds with that phos.
Okay.
So when a plant goes into the soil and it senses that phos, it takes up that phos, but 80% of that phos immediately ties up. So when it's tied up to calcium, the plant does not have access to it.
So
So
how do you get your phos untied from your calcium?
fungus and bacteria. So when you are applying the Johnson Sioux extract, that bacteria and that fungus is able to go to the phos and the calcium and break it apart and turn it into a soluble form, and it brings it to the plant. And so since we have all that stockpile of phos in our ground, if you're applying the synthetic, or if you're applying the Johnson Sioux compost, you're applying saprophytic funguses and beneficial bacteria that will bring the plant the phos and the calcium that's already there tied up in your soils. And so we don't need to be applying phosphorus. Like it will be 135 years before whoever farms my ground will ever have to apply phosphorus again.
Okay.
Unless whoever takes over my farm ground ends up going back to tillage.
Mold board plow, probably. Let's just hope that you're around a good long years to steward that land. Now, we talked about Johnson Sioux bioreactors, kind of got in depth, but where we left off, we didn't talk about the product that they made.
Okay.
And what do you do with it? And so the question I have, you start off by saying that you guys farm 8,000 acres. Okay. And you're talking about making like 5 or 6 chemical totes worth of compost. How are you spreading that out across your acres?
Yeah, great question. So to make an extract, there's 3 ways to get this into your field. You can apply it in furrow. So every single way that you're going to do this, you're going to make an extract, but you can apply it in furrow, you can treat the seed, or you can do a foliar application. So to do any of the 3 of those, you have to take your compost and you have to make a liquid extract. And let's be clear, I should have said this earlier when I first started talking about it. When I talk to people about Johnson Sioux compost, they're like, "Oh yeah, we use compost manure." I'm like, "No, not even close to the same thing." So the reason it's not is because you're composting that manure, and it is becoming a form that's easier to break down in your soil, and it's better than just putting straight manure on your soil. But when you're getting it from a feedlot, you're going to have it's going to be full of salts. So this compost is a fungally dominant compost, and it is
Hold up. I'm not going to let that one go by. If you're
okay.
getting your manure from a feedlot, it's probably full of antibiotics too.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, another great point to bring out. So anyway, so when you have Johnson Sioux compost, you have a compost that has a ratio close to 1-to-1 on your bacteria to fungus to bacteria ratio. And so when you're applying this to your ground, then it is getting more access to your fungus and bacteria, and that's why it's important to differentiate between compost, manure, and Johnson Sioux compost. So when you make your liquid extract, we have a machine, and you can put that in the show note too if you want to. SoilWorks makes a machine called the Bio 5 extractor. And so they also make a compost called Bio 5, and I'll talk about that here.
Is that just soil WORKS?
Yep.
Okay,
So
got it.
So
I'll put it in there, and hopefully if they get any sales, they'll let me know.
that's right. The Bio 5 makes or they make that extractor, and so we extract our compost from that Bio 5 extractor. And so when you extract compost, basically you need to put the compost in water, and you need to separate the compost, and they're separating the bacteria and the fungus and getting that in the atmosphere of the water, and breaking the compost apart through the water. So that extraction process takes about 20 minutes. If you just picture a cone with holes on the bottom that blows air up through it, that's the rough estimate. If they want more information than that, they'll have to go watch a YouTube video that I have or SoilWorks has on the Bio 5 extractor. And so that extracts the compost, and then you want to put in 2 pounds of compost for 8 gallons of water. So 1 to 4
Okay.
compost for 8 gallons. And that's how you make your extract. So when we're doing corn, we make it in furrow, or we put it on in furrow. So instead of putting down a liquid Phos with the planter, we're putting down a liquid extract with the corn seed.
Okay.
And so that's how we're getting it on with our corn the last 2 years. This next year, we'll do that, but we're also going to treat our corn seed. And so
You're going to treat it with compost extract.
Compost extract. So now when you treat when you think of best bang for your buck, the best bang for your buck is treating seed. And I was told that by David Johnson, and I was told that by Lance Gungerson. And so since I was talking to Lance, I was able to push back and be like, okay, that makes no sense to me. To me, in furrow would be the best way. Why is treating the seed the best way? Because if in furrow, you're getting the biology out into the ground, and it seems like they would produce better than it being absorbed into the
Oh, it makes sense to me. I mean, because as soon as that seed coat breaks, it's going to have like that compost extract and the fungal and the bacterial species that are in there, 600, 300 roughly of each. They're going to have immediate access to that corn plant, to that corn root.
And that's what my thought process was. But apparently, and this is research done by Dr. James White out of Rutgers University, bacteria and fungus have little things called endophytes. And so these endophytes, when the fungus and the bacteria are in the soil and they come in contact with the root system, the plant root system will actually absorb the bacteria and the fungus through these endophytes. And so what they did was, and James White just found this research from people in the Philippines, and I can't pronounce their names to give them credit, but if you watch any of James White's stuff, he always gives them credit. But they dyed yeast, and they dyed bacteria until they found strands that would survive being dyed by fluorescent chemical. And so once they dyed those, they put the seed in the petri dish and looked at it under a microscope with a black light, and they were able to watch the fungus and the bacteria be absorbed into the plant root system and go up into the plant. And then they would be there for a time period, and then they would go to the tip of the root and be shot back out into the atmosphere. So what they discovered is that the plant, the bacteria and the fungus go to the plant, they're absorbed, the endophytes are absorbed into the root system, and then these endophytes are what actually delivers the plant the micronutrients it needs. Once the plant has sucked out sucked out the micronutrients through these endophytes, it goes back to the tip of the roots and then is shot back out into the atmosphere, the rhizosphere, the area connected to the plant root, and goes and gets more micronutrients and then comes back to the plant and feeds it. And so it's a circular system of being fed back and forth into the plant root system. And so anyway, shoot, I lost my complete train of thought. What were we talking about before that with
we're talking about nutrient cycling into the soil.
Yeah. So why
Fung-
did I start talking about Dr. James White? Oh, how do we get it on? Okay, great. So how do we get it onto the seed? So that's why that's so funny. That's why coating the seed is so important, is because once you coat the seed, those endophytes penetrate the seed. And you can treat your wheat seed and plant it a year later and it will still have the same response. And so what happens when the seed is treated is that it already has the bacteria and the fungus like treated in the seed. So it immediately shoots out the roots and shoots out exudates the first response it has, even in crappy soil. You can take that seed and put it in tilled soil and it's going to respond like that. And what it does is it excites the bacteria, spores, and funguses, or the spores from the fungus and the bacteria that's already in your soil. It will stimulate growth just from doing that, and it's the quickest way to get response and to build biology in your soil is treating the seed. And it's better than doing it in furrow, because when you do it in furrow, the plant has to figure out it's there, and you have to hope that when it goes in furrow, a droplet of that extract hit the seed immediately so it has that response. If it doesn't hit the droplet doesn't hit the seed, then you have to wait for the plant to put out the exudates and to reach out. And so if you're in a healthy system where you've been doing regenerative agriculture, it'll have the response because it'll sense the biology as soon as it goes in the soil, because you built up the biology through regenerative agriculture. If you have a conventional system and you're just getting started, then you definitely want to treat the wheat seed, the corn seed, or the cover crop seed before you get it in there. And then lastly is the foliar application. So when guys are doing foliar applications, this is the least bang for your buck as far as like how far the compost can go, because you got to be spraying that like foliar like 20 gallons an acre. So when we think about the process, it's 20 gallons an acre for foliar, 8 gallons an acre for doing in furrow. But then when you think about, like, if I'm able to treat 500 bushels with 70 gallons, I'm able to do 70 acres. Or I mean, I'm able to do 500 acres on 70 gallons of compost. So the most efficient and then is also the most effective
Yep.
is just treating the seed. And so anyway, the foliar application though is mind blowing in itself though, because do you know what stripe rust is?
Sounds like a fungus that affects leaves and makes like red streaky stripy thingies on the leaves.
Yep, nailed it. So it really affects wheat in our area. So stripe rust is a parasitic fungus that attacks the leaf of the plant. Um, this is one of the most fascinating things that excites me a lot that I found out through this whole process. There is not a saprophytic, or no, sorry, there's not a parasitic fungus that can't be killed by a beneficial fungus. So every species of a parasitic fungus is lower on the food chain to a beneficial. So when you have this compost that you make and you apply a foliar application and you spray that on your plants, what happens is that lands on the leaf and it's absorbed into the stomata of the leaf system. And
Mhm.
so anyway, once it's absorbed, the plant actually knows which funguses are going to benefit it and which ones won't. And so it will feed the beneficial ones with exudates. And I didn't realize this, but the leaves actually put out exudates as well. And so those exudates on the leaves will feed the beneficial fungus and bacteria, and the ones that it doesn't need, even though they may be beneficial, they won't feed them. And so like they'll actually absorb into the stomata of the leaf, and then the those fungus and bacteria on the leaves will actually absorb micronutrients that land onto the leaf. Now, where you're at in Oklahoma, I know the wind never blows there.
Hey, I'm not in Oklahoma. I'm
Okay, sorry,
still in Kansas by
sorry.
like 20 miles.
So anyway, I know the wind never blows there.
Tell you,
But
you're in Colorado.
that's right. So anyway, when we have dust events and we get dust on our plants' leaves, they're able to break down those micronutrients that are coming in the dust and absorb it into the stomata of the leaf. And so
I suppose it stands to reason, human beings, we have, we're walking sack of microbes covered in bacteria.
yeah,
It stands to reason that plants would have a similar relationship with fungi, that there's, you know, fungi all through the plant structure and, you know, on the outside that we can't really necessarily see or detect.
So once that absorbs those fungus and bacteria to the stomata, that fungus and bacteria lives within the plant stomata. And so when parasitic funguses, they can't survive. And so either they're killed immediately, they don't even know what the process is. Either stripe rust avoids those fields, or when they get to those fields, they're killed immediately. Either way, if you spray your wheat with compost extract, you will never have a parasitic fungus attack your plant because it's impossible.
And that's
Unless,
probably cheaper than most fungicide.
well, if you consider like the materials that go into my bioreactor, I was able to make 4 bioreactors with $100, excuse me, $100 worth of wheat straw. So I made 4 bioreactors with $100 of wheat straw. That ends up breaking down to, I think they said 300 to 600 pounds on different sizes of bioreactors. So let's, to be safe, let's say it's 300 pounds times 4, divided by, let's see here, it'd be 300 acres for less than, yeah, $3 an acre basically in cost to spray to spray for stripe rust with the extract, as opposed to over $20 an acre to kill stripe rust. And once you go in and you spray to kill the stripe rust, that herbicide is like dropping a bomb and killing all the beneficial fungus that's out there. So you spray for that fungus to kill that stripe rust. Well, what's going to come back in 2 weeks? Your beneficials aren't coming back. More stripe rust is coming back. So
Yeah.
if you have a wet spring, all you're doing is making that plant more susceptible to stripe rust by spraying it to kill the stripe rust in the first place.
Makes perfect sense. Now, Dad said, he said, well, if you're going to spray for something, that's job security, because once you start spraying it, you'll always have it. And there was a time I didn't believe that, but you know, he was right.
Yeah.
He was right. Once you start spraying for a plant or trying to control something, like killing it, you're always going to have that problem.
Well, and the cool thing that we found, we started interseeding cover crops into our corn in 2020. And what we did was we bought a 20-foot John Deere disc drill that hooks up to the back of a 3-point. And so we dropped, it's on 10-inch spacing. So we dropped every third row so that we could put 2 rows of cover crops in between the growing corn.
Okay.
And so we started doing that. And I thought I would be able to see a huge benefit on days of grazing. And I didn't see that benefit of days of grazing. I think we were planting our cover crops too late. But this year I found an unexpected benefit. We had 2 circles right next to each other. One got cover crops interseeded in between the rows. The other one had a little bit more weed pressure. And so my dad was concerned that we wouldn't be able to kill the weeds later. And so he wanted to be able to spray the weeds and not kill the cover crops. And so we did cover crops on the one and not cover crops on the other. So in early August, our agronomist said, you have to spray to kill the spider mites on this circle that did not have cover crops. The circle that did have cover crops, we did not have to spray for spider mites. And the reason is because it was full of bees and ladybugs that were attracted to the flowering buckwheat that was growing out in our corn. So it was full of bees, it was full of ladybugs, and did not have spider mites that were being killed by the ladybugs. And so now I'm pretty confident we're going to interseed cover crops and everything, trying to get as many beneficial species out there to kill the spider mites so that we don't ever have to spray for spider mites again.
So off the top of your head, what was the difference between the field you had to spray for spider mites versus the next closest one with cover crops?
So our cost was less than $20 an acre in the cover crop seed, and I know that we were over $20 an acre to spray for the spider mites. So
Was there a significant difference in field yield per acre?
we're gonna find out. Neither one of them have been cut yet, but
Oh, you guys haven't picked them yet. Okay, sorry.
yeah, the field that had the spider mites has started dying quicker because the leaves that had the spider mites on them died, or, that they were attacked by the spider mites. So I guess
Interesting.
I'm assuming that we're going to have a yield drag from that, but we'll know when we get the combine out.
So I had a little corn garden, which did not turn out well. Um, heirloom seeds, and I was reading Masanuka Fukuoka, whatever, One Straw Revolution. I was
Okay.
listening to it when I was planting my corn. So, like, I just kind of went out, watered it, forked it a little bit to loosen up the soil, poked about an inch and a half hole, and dropped a germinated corn seed in it. Like 98% of what I planted came up.
Okay.
Everything came up, boot, four leaf, everything looked great. Nothing pollinated.
Huh.
And then I started getting ear rot on stuff that did actually, like, I'd have a half a pollinated ear that started getting ear rot in it.
Huh.
And some of the seeds or some of the kernels actually started sprouting on the ear. Have you ever
Huh.
heard of that?
So it put out an ear without having husks on it, and it just started having kernels on it.
No, it had a husk on it. Everything. I mean, everything looked right, but you
Okay.
kind of peel the husk back, and a lot of them would have fungi, would be rotting,
Okay.
and it doesn't make any sense to me because it's been so hot and dry. Um, and then some of the seeds on the cob, some of the kernels on the cob had broken open and sent out a root tiller.
That's interesting. I've seen to where we've had oh they call it corn smut. It's I can't think of the name of it in Mexico, but it's actually
Yeah, the
the
blue stuff.
this Mexican truffles that they make tacos out of.
I
Um,
had some of that, but I'm not that brave.
yeah, I cook some of ours just trying it. As long as you get it early on in the early stages, it just tastes like regular mushrooms that you would fry up. What type of corn was it? Was it Jimmy Red or was it blue maize or something else?
Well, I planted some atomic orange, which is like a 70, 80-day corn, dwarf corn. Um, that looked real good up until about the third week of June when it got hot. And it didn't do anything. I think I got 2 ears out of probably 200 plants.
Yeah.
Um, and then I planted like 400 plants of Wade's giant Indian corn. And it's supposed to be 8, 9 foot, 105, 110-day corn. Advertised as 12-inch long, multicolored 12-inch long cob with multicolored kernels.
Okay.
I didn't get any. I, like, they're showing pictures of these cobs that are supposed to look like baseball bats and all this, beautiful, pretty multicolored corn all the way around. Yeah, I got like 2 crappy ears this long. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a few more out there drying out, but I'm going to try to reseed them next year. I'll plant half seeds that I grew this year from that patch, and I'll plant
Try
half of
again.
another variety.
Get some compost from me. Try again, and we can treat your seed and then spray your plants as they're growing. We'll see if that helps you.
Yeah, for sure.
That'll that should take care of the fungus that's attacking your plant at least.
Yeah, well, we'll have to communicate, see if you're going to be anywhere where I'm going to be in the next few months, and bring me a gallon or two.
That sounds great.
Cool, cool. I might even yeah. Yeah. So we're kind of running along. Like, I mean, we can keep going however long as you want to. But I think what I'd like for our listeners to hear about is, I mean, this has been great conversation. I think that's kind of needed to get out there to talk about, how to go from, let's just say, how to go from any one of your neighbors that's doing nothing that you're doing, right? That's still doing full tillage, a lot of chemicals, pumping a lot of water and barely scraping by, with, 180, 190 bushel irrigated corn. How does somebody go from that system to where you are? And what kind of lessons that you know now do you wish you knew when you started?
I definitely wish I would have known about compost and compost extracts, but I think part of it is accepting that like everything is a journey. Like I had to come to a place where I could accept that I can understand all of this. I just have to work my butt off. Like I have to work harder. And I think that that's part of the problem is like I've got really close friends that find it fascinating what we're doing, and they'll say to me, "I don't know that, I had the ability, like I could put the time in to figure it out." Well, though my friends that say that, like, they have to come to a place where they accept, that's not an excuse. I have to learn this because I have to stop tilling. I have to want and care about the future of our soils. If we're losing, the beginning of that book, Dirt, it says that every year in America we lose enough topsoil to fill the back of a pickup for every family in America. So
That's
if
totally not shocking.
yeah, so if we're
Totally not shocking to me and you.
yeah, and if we're losing that much, then we have to realize that eventually it's going to be gone. And
Let's put it in context for a second. Okay. You said a pickup load for
yep,
every person in America.
every family.
Every family. Okay.
Yep,
It's still a lot of pickups. I mean, that's 100
yep,
100 million odd pickups. 5 tons an acre is kind of the coast to coast average that I've heard. But it's 5 tons loss per acre.
every year.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
In a conventional cropping system. And that's, wind and water erosion. So, okay, what does 5 tons an acre look like? That's a sheet of paper.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's continue to like try to put this in perspective. Okay. So if you go down to a dirt pit and you wanted to buy dirt, you can buy dirt for $10 a ton. So if you're losing 5 tons an acre, it's $10 a ton at your local dirt pit. Let's not even talk about how much it's going to cost to haul it and spread it back out on a uniform thickness. Let's just cost the cost to purchase. You're going to spend $50 an acre every year to replace the topsoil that washed off your farm. Now, for all you farm credit guys and all you banker guys, why are we loaning farmers $3,000+ an acre to go buy a farm and raise tillage monocrop corn and let $5 or let 5 tons an acre of their soil wash down the creek or blow away every year?
Yeah.
Because that's your value too, Mr. Banker, Mr. Farm Credit.
Yeah. And so I think the other thing, like going from going from where they're at now to being able to do regenerative agricultural principles, like you have to be like at some point, like my journey was I want to raise cattle, and that's what got me in. And so because I wanted to raise cattle, I started accepting all the other things that I didn't want to accept or believe about about what I was doing. And I think everybody has to have this aha moment where they realize, like, you know this is like, people may get into it because they hear a YouTube video that I give and I say that we save $170,000 in nitrogen input cost. And that's the purpose of making the nitrogen video. I want to appeal to their pocketbook. I want them to change, regardless. I don't care if you change because you realize you're destroying the environment and you're destroying your own ground, and that we're having areas of the Great Barrier Reef that are dying, and we have dead zones off the coast of Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. Like, I want you to stop because of that. But if you won't listen to that, that's fine. Listen and hear that you can save $170,000 an acre, or $50 an acre to $100 an acre, depending on how much you're spending. I'll appeal to you either way. But I want to appeal to you because my goal is to get as many people to do this as possible, because I believe we have to change if we want a future. And so I think for people getting started, the most important thing in my area is learning how to do compost. And if you don't want to learn how to do compost, then buy compost from one of the many people that sell it. Because I didn't get to talk about the Bio 5, but we applied Bio 5 at the same rate, 8 gallons an acre with 2 pounds for 8 gallons. We applied that in furrow, and I think we raised some of the best silage corn that we've raised. And so it basically performed just as good as the Johnson Sioux compost. So really, like, our ground is so starved for the biology that the Bio 5 stuff is just as effective as the Johnson Sioux, even though it doesn't have the same, fungal component. It has other stuff in it. It has a lot of humics, and it has like, it's a great product. So anyway, whether or not you're making your own or buying vermicasting or this Bio 5, get it into your soil and then start to watch YouTube videos and read books and educate yourself so that you can start to make decisions based on your knowledge of what's taking place in your soil rather than making a decision based on history. And one of the things I said in my presentation at the Bottom Line conference is we have to stop being offended that we're telling people that tillage is wrong and it's bad for the environment, it's bad for our ground. We take that and we're offended by that. You're saying my granddad, my great grandfather were destroying the environment. Yes, and it's okay because they didn't know. They
Yep.
were they were doing the best that they could with the tools that's been given to them. I'm giving you brand new tools. And so now you can decide what you're going to do with the tools. I'm not insulting your granddad. I'm insulting you. If you don't change, it's on you. It's not I'm not saying what your granddad did was wrong. He did the best with what he's been given, but you've been given new tools, new information. If you continue on the path that you're going on, that's on you. That's not on anybody of your granddad. And at some point, it's like I have to balance the balance of I want people to change, and so I'm going to appeal to their pocketbook, and I'm going to try to be as little like offend them as little as possible, and to paint in a picture to get as many people to do it as possible the right way. But at some point, I'm gonna have to be able to tell them the truth about what's happening to our topsoils, and it's going to offend people, and I have to not care. Like I want people to change, and so it's like some people I'm going to piss off, and maybe had I just focused on the pocketbook thing, I would have got them. But at some point, some people won't listen to it unless they hear the other, and it's just a balancing act, and you have to be able to balance that. But at the end of the day, uh, truth has to be told, and I can't care who hates me or who's offended or who's not. Like people, I need to hear the truth.
If the truth is offensive, maybe the problem is not with the truth.
Mm,
So
yeah.
man, I haven't even let you talk at all about your cows. So let's talk about let's talk about your cows in the context that your farm serves the cows and your forage chain through the year. And let's go.
Yeah, let's close with that because I got to leave in about 10 minutes. But so I love that whole aspect of the journey because you know when I got started, that's what I cared about is the cows, and I love efficient, functional mama cows. And so as a red Angus breeder, I'm trying to produce a cow that is going to produce a bull that is going to be something that they want to retain in their herd. And so we focus really hard on feet. I from talking to other breeders, I know that I probably do more diligence as far as calling either the stud or the person that raised the bull asking for feet. I know other people that do it. I know that there's a lot of people who don't do it. But to me, if you're going to be breeding cattle, then you better be asking for pictures of that bull's dam and that bull's feet and that dam's feet if you want to know what you're getting. And that helps me eliminate like a bunch of bulls that I'm going to pick because if they don't have good feet and if they don't have good EPDs for feet, if I'm looking to outcross to a black bull, I won't even pay attention to it because I'm wanting to fix the breed. I don't need to chase carcass and all. I love good marbling. I love good ribeye, but I'm not going to chase that at the sake of a guy buying a bull of mine and then he has to get rid of it in 2 years because it couldn't walk. And it's like, well, it had a great ribeye and great marbling. Well, that's fantastic. He had to shoot it because it wouldn't make it on his place. So
Right.
like I want functional cattle. And so when it comes to functionality, like that plays into everything with the soil. When we first started getting into doing this, I remember having to one year, one of those first years, we doctored like 50 cows and 50 calves, and I only had like 70 cow, pairs. We had to doctor 50 of them for foot rot. And this year, I think I had 3 out of 150 that we doctored for foot rot. And so, being able to see that those numbers drop, from being able to have them in our environment and having them adapt to our environment, I love that aspect of it. And I like the fact that we're actually seeing dung beetles for the first time on our farm, this year. I didn't even wasn't even aware of a dung beetle, why it was even important until I started doing the regenerative process. And then, when I found out we needed to have dung beetles, I started using Cydectin because Cydectin doesn't kill dung beetles. And so this last year we saw a few, and this year we saw about 3 times as many as we did last year. So it's like 6, which not a lot, but still it's exciting to see.
I would challenge you to put your Cydectin away.
I'm like, I would love to talk to you more about that and just have a better plan for what's better even for the
Okay, so why would you, if you have dung beetles in your soil, why would you use Cydectin? Why would you use that kind of insecticide?
so
What's your target?
so Cydectin, I'm trying to kill lice, and Cydectin doesn't affect the dung beetles, and that's why I've used Cydectin instead of ivermectin.
Why don't you wait till say June 15th next year to work your cows for lice,
Okay,
and then see what, because when they slick off in the summer, the lice fall off.
you're saying it's not even an issue.
I'm saying it's not an issue. It's hard to watch your cows get ate up by lice.
Yeah.
It's hard. Is it hard on your cows? Yes. But you know what? As soon as summer comes in and they get their winter coat off and get their summer coat on, which they're going to do faster if they're hormonally balanced and they're on a rising plane of nutrition on good forage, they're going to shed that winter coat, and those lice aren't going to have anywhere to live, and they're just going to leave.
Fair.
And that's what I do. But, I'm also that crazy idiot that runs horned cattle in the Red Hills.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for the selling bull purposes and stuff, I would probably still need it for my bulls as far as like eye appeal and but on the cows, I think that would be something I wouldn't mind trying just to see.
And see, I don't mind. I mean, lice, obviously, that's something different. But like if you're doing it for fly control, I kind of don't mind seeing, a lot of flies on a bull because that's testosterone.
Sure.
But there's a point where, you pass where it becomes uneconomic to have your flies taking that much blood out of your cows.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's something that everybody kind of has to
Well,
make.
and I don't. I mean, my main focus is the lice. Like we have to. I mean, that's another conversation too about like with your lick tubs and stuff. Like, I'd be interested in finding something that's more natural to take care of flies than say a poron, because I don't think that I don't think Cydectin is an effective deterrent for flies.
I think moving your cows every 3-4 days tops is effective fly control.
Got it.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, as long as I'm moving my cows once a week, flies aren't a problem. It's, when I get to some of the bigger paddocks and I'm on low stock densities and, they're going to be in there for 10, 12, 14 days. That's when we start to see fly pressure come back. But then, it takes another couple pasture rotations. And you're breaking that fly's life cycle by not letting that cow be exposed to the manure where the fly eggs are hatching. By the time that fly egg hatches out of the manure, hopefully the cows are at least a half a mile or a couple paddocks away.
Yeah.
They're still going to have some.
Um.
And I would say, okay, so when I bought these cows in 20, they did get Cydectin, or a Cydectin family thing. I can't remember what it was, but that's what they got. And we strip grazed at like 55,000 pounds for 210 days on that herd, and flies never got bad. Last year, no treatment, no fly treatment on them. And there were less flies. And this year, there's even less. And they weren't treated this year either.
Right.
I guess kind of what I'm saying is, yeah, there's a lot of insecticides out there, and Cydectin is supposed to be okay for dung beetles. And I get that. But I kind of challenge why we need to use a lot of it, honestly. And that's my take on it. So if you have a few minutes left, let's take us home.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything else. Try it and see if it was beneficial to go off or not. But
Yeah.
no, Brian, I love this conversation, and yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and anytime you want to have me back, I'd be willing to have or to talk more about cattle and rotational grazing in the future.
Give it another year or so.
Sounds
I'll put
great.
you back on the list, and it just might take you another year or so to get back up to the top.
Hey, no worries. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Hey, I really appreciate you doing this. Glad we finally made a connection, and I'll let you go get on with your day because you said you had something else you had to go do.
Fantastic.
All right, stick around for the ad reads, guys. That's it. Bye.
Brian.